Live from the spectacular Garden Roots in South Africa. We're streaming worldwide on eradiosa.com.
Chatting to Mampho Dlulane from Hear Clearly Group today, and we're going to find out a bit more about her and the amazing work that she's doing. A big hello to you, Mampho.
Hi, Ian. How are you?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
I'm all right.
So, Mampho, you are working at Hear Clearly Group in Port Elizabeth, and today we're going to talk about what you're doing, especially hearing loss in children. But let's start at the beginning. Tell us a bit more about yourself, your personal background. Where did you go to school, and how did you get into audiology?
Okay, interesting one that, but also kind of unremarkable. I grew up in King Williamstown, Eqonce. I went to Kingsridge High School for girls for a good 12 years, or however long grade 1 to grade 12 is. Mm-hmm. And yes, that's basically it. A nice, easy one there. Interestingly enough, though, when I was at school, we usually had these assemblies where a speaker would come and motivate us, or a speaker would come and tell us about their lives. And I remember in grade 8, we had a young girl. She was probably 8, and she was completely deaf, but she was speaking. So she was speaking to us. She was telling us about her hearing journey and how she had no hearing at all, but had learned to acquire speech. And
wow.
I think that's what planted the seed for me. I mean, at that point, I didn't know what audiology was. I didn't know what I wanted to study. I mean, when you're in grade 8, you're more worried about what's at the tuck shop.
Yeah.
So yes, it was one of those. And I think that stuck in my mind when eventually I needed to choose something to study further in matric, because I had no idea what to do, but I know I wanted to be in healthcare. I know I wanted to work with people. So then I researched a bit on audiology, and then I remembered, oh my goodness, there was that young girl, Snethemba, who came when I was in grade 8, and I think this is the kind of thing I would want to go into, studying and working as further on in life. So then I applied to UCT and yes, studied, and now I'm an audiologist.
That's fantastic. How long did you study, Mampho?
It was a 4-year course.
Okay.
I did a BSc in audiology with honors at the University of Cape Town. Yes.
Okay. And is Hear Clearly Group your first official job as audiologist?
Oh, no. So when you're in healthcare, generally what they do is you do your studies, complete them, and then the year after you go into a community service year, where they place you anywhere in the country. I was placed in the Eastern Cape, Mthatha, at the Nelson Mandela Academic Hospital. And it's a tertiary institution, so I got to really get into all the nitty-gritties of audiology, which was quite an opportunity for a community service audiologist, because you do specialized testing, you do oral rehabilitation. I mean, it's a full-on department with a lot of experienced audiologists, and I quite enjoyed that. And then from there, I went into district, which was in Port Elizabeth. So then I moved to PE from Tata, and I was working in the district clinics, so Utenay, Port Elizabeth, servicing all the clinics in primary healthcare, which was quite different to a tertiary institution where you've got everything and the whole team is here and you can pick everyone's brains. So the setting there was more primary healthcare, getting people aware of their hearing losses, trying to get parents to screen their children for hearing loss. So it was a lot of prevention, promotion talks. And yes, I quite enjoyed that as well. It was quite different. And while I was working there, I got a call from the partners, and they asked if I was interested in this opportunity. And I thought, yay, let's.
Yeah.
And so we're here. Yes.
Fantastic. What areas of audiology are close to your heart?
For me, it's definitely pediatric audiology, more the school-going age. I do quite enjoy working with children, our children who are 5, 6, 7, 8. Yes, and definitely also advocacy, because advocating for people to understand what hearing loss is, be it on the smaller scale where I'm talking to families about how to support a family member that does have hearing loss or their child who has hearing loss, all the way up to getting, better acoustics in spaces so that people with hearing loss can cope better, hear better in a not so favorable listening situation or listening environment.
Mampho, how do children generally lose hearing, apart now from being born that way?
Oh, okay. So there are actually quite a number of causes of hearing loss or acquired hearing loss. For children, it's typically, the bigger ones would be meningitis, which does tend to knock the auditory system. So yes, it's usually meningitis, measles, mumps, those sort of things that can also be viral and affect auditory nerves. They do tend to, for a lot of children, cause hearing loss as well. But the more then temporary things would be things like otitis media, so the ear infections, which are usually allergy, sinus-related things as well. So there are quite a number of causes of hearing loss in children, but our biggest ones being meningitis, measles, which do tend to really, really affect the auditory system. Just on a side note, I do want to mention that it's also very, very important to make sure that after your child's been diagnosed with either the measles or meningitis or mumps, to get the hearing tested, especially if they've been hospitalized, because sometimes they'll often treat the problem and sometimes that medication is ototoxic, so poisonous for the auditory system. So that hearing test really, really matters, just to make sure that their hearing itself and their language development isn't affected by any changes in their actual hearing.
How do children, show that they have hearing loss? What are the signs that we should look out for as parents?
So it also goes back to, remember, for us to speak or learn to speak, we need to have heard something. So if your child is delayed in speaking, so they're speaking but quite delayed in comparison to their peers, and when I say quite delayed, I mean you'll notice it as a parent. They aren't saying anything, or their speech isn't as clear as that language develops, or they don't respond as nicely. So you call them, they're not responding, they're putting the TV up quite loud. You give them an instruction, they don't follow the instruction, they follow better when you're pointing, or the child themselves starts using gestures. So they're pointing, they aren't really vocalizing what they need to say, but they either pull you to something and ask you to then do something for them. So it's those subtle, and I mean, they're very, very subtle signs. It is an easy thing to miss as a parent. But it is also one of those where parents do need to be aware what to look out for. So is my child speaking? Are they speaking clearly? Is their language developing adequately as they're developing as well? It really, really matters.
If I suspect that my child is suffering from hearing loss, what do I do? I can come to you, and then what do you do? What's the process? Do you screen them? How does it work?
Okay, so for children, what I would advise generally is if you have a newborn baby, get their hearing screened at the hospital. You're there, you've got the time to, baby takes a nap, audiologist comes in, does a quick screening, and you get an idea of how their hearing is when they're born. And then later on in life, if you are ever worried about their hearing, what we do on our side is we'll first screen their hearing, which is actually quite a nice, easy test for children to do as well. So be it a play sort of test where they listen to a beep or a little birdie and drop the ball in the monster's mouth. It is, there are different ways to test children. But yes, sometimes we do then a more objective test if the child is difficult to assess, where we then put a machine, the machine runs the test and then the auditory system then responds, and it gives us an idea of where about the child is hearing. So is there hearing loss? Is there no hearing loss? And then we do further testing depending on that test itself.
That's very interesting. Mampho, what does treatment entail?
Okay, so treatment with hearing loss in children does vary, well, with adults as well, but it really depends on where the problem is in that auditory pathway. Because for children, typically, what they will have is either ear infections or something just behind the eardrum, a bit of fluid, a bit of mucus, that then does block how well they hear the sounds coming in. So there, generally what we do is we'll test the children, see is it a middle ear component, and then refer them to an ear, nose, and throat specialist if it is something that's medically manageable, and then review them for a test, see if that medical management helped, and then we take it from there. Usually those guys with really good ear, nose, and throat management tend to then go back to normal hearing with some monitoring of their actual hearing itself. In other cases where we've got a sensory hearing loss, so there it means it looks more permanent, it is more permanent, it is either in our cochlea or in the auditory nerve. There what we then do is make sure that the child has access to sound. And to do that, after our testing, we see where their hearing is and use that residual hearing to amplify using hearing aids. So in essence, we're trying to make sure that the child has access to sound, but also good access to speech sounds. So we fit with hearing aids, and then supplement that speech development with some oral rehabilitation, which then includes getting the child used to paying attention to sound, discriminating between different sounds, and so it is quite an involved one, but it's like physiotherapy for the ears.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Wow,
Yes.
It's very, very interesting. Now, what would you say is the most rewarding part of your job? Probably a few things, but if you had to pick one.
Well, quick story. The first time I fitted a young one, he was probably 5, with hearing aids, he let out a little fart and he heard it. So he laughed.
Oh,
He
wow.
looked around the room, he looked at his mother, and he just burst out laughing because I guess he enjoyed that sound. He didn't
Yes.
know farts made a sound.
No.
So there was that. So it's definitely the little things where you see a little glimmer in the eye, and
Yeah.
they're wondering and they're looking for more sound. So it's definitely, well, once the child is fitted, and even adults, as soon as they're hearing even slightly better, that is quite rewarding for me.
Wonderful. Well, what a
Definitely.
story. What a
Yes.
story there. Where can we find you, Mampho, and how can we contact you?
Okay. So I'm based in Port Elizabeth. There is our pediatric department there. But otherwise, we are also along the garden route for our adults in Jeffreys Bay, in Hartenbos, in George, in Knysna, in Plettenberg Bay, in Sedgefield, we're literally all over the garden route, so we are quite accessible. But otherwise, I'm in Port Elizabeth for the children and adults, but otherwise predominantly seeing children and adults.
Great. Mampho Dlulane at Hear Clearly Group, audiologist. It was great talking to you.
Thank you, Ian.
Lovey, seriously, I think it's time you go for a hearing test.
Come on, darling, I've already got a hairy chest.
It's not a question of volume, it's a question of clarity. It's like I hear you talking, but I can't make out what you're saying, especially when there's background noise. There is a solution. Get a free screening hearing test and a free trial period with the latest technology at Hear Clearly. Because life's too short to miss a thing. Visit hearclearly.co.za.
Visit a Garden Route branch of Hear Clearly nearest to you.
Like us on Facebook at Entertainment Radio SA.